Welcome to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. I'm Joel Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This show features questions from the Personality Hacker community that we answer in about 10 minutes. We've been using personality types in our coaching for years, and we'd love to answer your questions about personal growth through the lens of type. You can find out more about us at personalityhacker.com. Okay, now let's hear today's question.
Hi, Joel, Witt, and Antonia. Hi, so my name is Deonta, and I'm an INFJ, and I've always really resonated with the personality advice you gave to my type, so thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So I was recently listening to your episode on giving personality info and explanations to newbies and explaining it to newbies, right? And when you finally were talking about judgers versus perceivers, I actually got a little confused, or I was like, oh, which one am I? Because like I said, I've always resonated so much with advice given to INFJs, and for some reason, just, it's hit it on the head, and I've just been like, yes, I'm an INFJ, everything resonates, but when you, Antonia, for example, you gave the example, like, you feel like you can only be on time to so many things, and then you need to have that flexibility to not be on time to other things, right? Whenever you have that wiggle room for that balance. And I really resonated with that. And I think I am kind of a spontaneous person. I'll go on a hike, or I'll be like, let's go here to eat, very spontaneously. On the other hand, Joel Witt, you said that like sometimes INFJ or J's, judgers, they think perhaps that their outer world needs to be structured so that they can have inner world freedom, but that maybe they need that catharsis or that permission to have more inner world freedom and to be given that permission and permission to like contemplate their minds and their hearts. But here's the thing. I always thought that INFJs, or J's, right? J's, but I'm an INFJ. We're supposed to be good at contemplating their hearts and knowing what was in their heads. So if you could just maybe make that distinction, please.
Thanks, Deonta, for the question.
This comes up a lot in Profiler Training, which is the program where we teach people how to have a conversation with another person and help them find their best fit type. We call it silver bullet thinking, which is this idea that every person is going to have totally consistent personality type traits, and that you can ask a single question and get that answer back, and then that is how you know what the person's type is or what one of their dichotomies are or their cognitive functions. The thing is, when you're doing a lot of profiling, you realize that people are incredibly complex, and we have a lot of almost contradictory elements to who we are. So I want to speak to this idea of, I resonated when you said that there's only so many things you can be on time for as a perceiver. And I'm realizing that I'm a spontaneous person. So how could I reconcile this idea of being spontaneous with being a judger type or having judger preferences? And the answer is because there is a spontaneous part inside INFJs. There's a spontaneous part to all of the types, including the judger types. And so that's not a silver bullet. It's not, if you identify with descriptions or characteristics that are not normally associated with your personality type, that doesn't mean that you are not that personality type. Now, I actually don't know if you have INFJ preferences or not. So I'm not saying, yes, you're definitely an INFJ and don't even question that. There is value, I think, to having moments when we go, oh, am I actually this type? And taking a second to introspect and kind of go down that rabbit hole a little bit. But it's okay to associate with other characteristics and traits because we're complex people. And there is a part inside of us that has a desire for the other side. Now, most of the time when we see, it's like, well, I'm gonna basically copy exactly what you said, Deonta. I'm gonna say it almost exactly, which is like, well, I'm a spontaneous person. I like to go hiking spontaneously. So the difference between a judger and a perceiver in this is not that you can think of moments of spontaneity. It's that you live your life with spontaneity. It's that you can't not be spontaneous. It's a compulsion inside of you. For perceiving types, it's something that we always have to rein in. It's something that we have to figure out. It's like a life problem that we're on this world timeline that constantly and perpetually keeps going forward in a linear fashion, and we can't wrap our heads around why time is a linear concept and that we have to figure out how to step into this stream. it's not a thing we can do. It is a thing that we must do. And in fact, we're always trying to fight against it.
I like how you couch as the problem of our lives as perceivers.
It is, right? It's the problem. It's the thing we have to figure out is how to fit in with the timeline of the rest of the world and interface with them.
It's so true.
Yeah. And that's why, of course, when a perceiver goes, well, but my closet is really organized. I'm like, that doesn't mean you're not a perceiver. Just because you have like one thing that you highlight and you look at and you're like, look, there's a space of organization in my life. It's like, yeah, we can be organized, but it's not our way of going about things. It's not like our MO. So don't look at the anomalies. And even in a profiling session, this will throw me off as a profiler. I'll ask a series of questions and a person will say something that is different than what's the trend so far. And I will put too much weight on it because it's the anomaly. It's not the rule. And so because it's the exception, I put all this weight on it and I go, oh, am I looking at this person wrong? And then I realize, no, I have half a dozen pieces of evidence for the other side. And I've got like one thing that indicates this other characteristic. And that's just because humans, it's like we are impossible to put into boxes. That's literally impossible. So there's that one thing. Don't put too much weight on that one anomaly. If you're living your life in a spontaneous way, if you really struggle to organize your time at all, if you live best when you're allowed to be more spontaneous, that's when you're in your flow state and that's when you feel great and the best, and you're doing it as much as humanly possible, then maybe you should consider that you have perceiver preferences. But if it's one of those things where in rest and relaxation, in time periods where you're looking for a little bit of respite, if that's when you find yourself being spontaneous, well, as an INFJ, or if you are an INFJ, you have extroverted sensing or sensation as that 3-year-old or inferior function, right? That's the baby in your car. That part of you needs to be expressed. That part of you will, kind of pull on your pant leg and go, hey, we need to go be spontaneous for a minute and go live in the moment. That's all NFJs. That's all NJ types. All NJ types have that sensation part of them that needs to be expressed at times. But it's at times. It's not an MO or a way of life.
The second part of your question then addresses this idea that judgers need to give themselves permission to go get in touch with their inner world. And I think what you're asking is, well, if judgers prefer outer world organization to have inner world freedom, don't we already have the skill and the ability and even the tendency to go inside and wander our hearts and minds internally because we're organizing our outer world so much?
Well, and what I think what I got from Deonta's question is, aren't we already good at that? Right? Why would we have to give ourselves permission to go do that? Aren't we already naturally talented at it? And I would say there's two elements to this. The first one is that sometimes judger types have to give themselves permission to do it because the outer world, the world that they're extroverting in, is pulling their attention so much. And we get so many rewards and we get so much positive feedback when we are engaged with the outside world that sometimes judger types need to give themselves permission to separate from the outside world. Now, an introvert is more likely to do this. They're more likely to just naturally figure out how to set their lives up to be more introverted. But that's not always the case. Sometimes an introvert's life is very chaotic. And, let's say you got 20 kids, right? Or not, 20 is obviously
20 kids,
an exaggeration. But I mean, like
4 kids.
Yeah, let's say you've got 4 kids and they're all between the ages of like 3 and 15 and they're constantly needing your attention. And, you've got this job and you've got family responsibilities outside of your immediate family, et cetera, et cetera. And so you might be just running like crazy. And you have to remember, despite the chaos of my life and despite how busy it is, I have to have this time to go ruminate. And so when we say sometimes judgers or IJ types have to give themselves permission to go do it, we're saying against the circumstances of a life that doesn't want you to be doing it. And if you don't, then you're going to die a death by 1,000 cuts, basically, or your soul is. So that's what we mean by giving oneself permission to go do that. But the other thing is, introverts, yeah, you're more likely to go inside. You're more likely to go explore that element of yourself that is represented in the dominant or driver cognitive function. So for an INFJ, that would be introverted intuition or perspectives. Yes, that part of you are going to just naturally be focused on exploring and engaging and heading that way. The challenge, though, is assuming that a tendency to go do that means skill development and it means mastery, which it's not. All types have to figure out ways to use that time of inner world rumination, going inside oneself. Everybody has to figure out how to do it in the highest quality way possible. So being able to access the creative part of yourself, the intuitive, imaginative, future-pacing, perspective-shifting part of you is not the same as knowing your heart and mind. Now, an INFJ is going to also be visiting the mental piece a little bit more than other types, because the other introverted function that you're accessing often is introverted thinking or accuracy, which is your 10-year-old function in the car model, or the tertiary in technical terms. So when you go inside, you're also going to want to think in terms of what makes sense to me, what's logical, what's the data points, what am I thinking, what are other people thinking, what are their minds on this? And so there is going to be a bit of focus thrown to that space. But that's also your 10-year-old or tertiary function, and you might have some overconfidence there. You might think that you know what people's thoughts are, or your own thoughts, and you might think you're being rigorously logical when maybe you're missing some data pieces. And so there is a tendency to want to master that piece too, but there's always going to be an element of uncertainty of whether or not you really know your own mind and other people's minds. Now, that said, that doesn't mean you're necessarily tapping into the other aspects of introversion. You're not going to be tapping into introverted feeling or authenticity that much, which is knowing your intentions and motivations and knowing other people's intentions and motivations, or how you're feeling about any specific thing. And you're certainly not going to want to go to introverted sensing or memory, which is, an 8th function for an INFJ. And that's a space that's very much about, who you are based on your past experiences and where you've come from, and all of the things that make you up, and how time has passed, and all the things that have changed over the course of time. These are all aspects of our hearts and minds. These are all aspects of who we are internally. And there are going to be some elements that you're hyper-focused on and other elements that you're completely ignoring. So knowing that it's kind of a nice element to remind us to have some modesty in our thoughts about our abilities to go inside, or even as extroverts to go outside. We all assume that the little slice of life that we're focused on is a full picture. So when we say you have to give yourself permission, we mean in a hectic world that is constantly encouraging you to be outside of yourself. So you might have to carve out some time and space if you have that kind of schedule. But the other thing is, remember, when you are going inside, you don't necessarily immediately have mastery. And I know that there is a tendency online to give INFJs superhuman powers. Like we were talking about that, Joel.
The godlike powers of the INFJ, right?
Right. Like this idea that, INFJs are hyper talented in every possible way that they want to be. And it's like, well, no, they're humans that also are struggling and figuring things out as well.
And they all have like 30 narcissists in their life now at this point.
Always, right?
INFJ. All right. So the other thing I wanted to make a comment to that was coming up for me as you were talking, Antonia, is this idea of the part of life you're in. Like we always talk about type in type community and type circles and online and stuff, like it's in isolation. An INFJ is an INFJ is an INFJ. Well, an INFJ at the age of 20 might be going through a lot different part of their life than an INFJ at the age of 60. So as an example, we're way more extroverted in our high school and college years than we are later in life. Everybody's more extroverted because you're in a social mating time often. You're looking for partners. You're looking for social groups. You're looking for opportunities and career. So you might have more of an extroverted, part of you coming out to the forefront during that time of life. Whereas maybe later in life, as you're more seasoned, you might settle back into yourself. So we can't talk about these things outside of the timeline of your life. Timelines are very important. Your career choice is important. There's all these other factors that pull upon aspects of your personality and how you show up to the world. That's just something to consider as you think about, what is my best fit type? How am I showing up to the world? What part of my life am I in right now? I think that really speaks to helping us triangulate to our actual preferences.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to summarize, if you hear a character trait that doesn't stereotypically fit your best fit type, but you identify with it nonetheless, that doesn't mean anything. It just means that there's a part of you that is coming out that might not be the stereotype of your type, right? It might not be one of the usual listed traits. It doesn't mean anything. If you've got 1 or 2 of those, congratulations, you're human. If you've got 20 of them and it's overwhelming evidence that you are heading this other direction, well, maybe you want to consider the personality types where those traits are more common. So don't put too much weight on a single characteristic that goes against, quote unquote, against type, because nothing actually goes against type necessarily until it's overwhelming amounts of evidence. That's number 1. And number 2, the reason why you need permission to carve that space out for yourself is because life might be complicated and it might be pulling you out of your preferences. It might be pulling you out of a space that you need to visit more regularly. Or when you go to that space, maybe you need to do higher quality rumination when you're there in order to be able to really understand your heart and mind in a more quality way, not just in a my default is to ruminate about this thing way. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. You know yourself better than anybody else. So if INFJ preferences still sound right to you, if you still feel like you identify with those top 2 cognitive functions for an INFJ, I don't see any reason for you to go through an existential crisis of type.
Thanks, Deonta, for the question. You can ask your own question about personality types or personal growth. Visit personalityhacker.com/questions. We also have programs designed to help you with your personal growth through the lens of personality types. Again, visit personalityhacker.com and find the program that's made just for you. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Thank you for listening to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. We'll talk with you on the next episode. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.